Giulia Romano had built her life with the precision of an architect drawing blueprints. Every line had purpose, every angle calculated for strength. At 26, she had her own design firm, a modern apartment overlooking the Tiber River, and a reputation for creating buildings that defied gravity while honoring tradition. She wore her independence like armor, polished and impenetrable. That Tuesday evening, driving through Rome's ancient streets toward her parents' estate, she had no idea that armor was about to be tested. The invitation had been simple: family dinner, nothing special. But when she pulled through the iron gates and saw the Ferrara family's sleek black cars already parked in the circular driveway, her stomach twisted with an instinct she couldn't name. The man who smiled through everything. Dante Ferrara leaned against the marble fountain in the Romano garden, swirling a glass of red wine from his family's vineyards. To anyone watching, he seemed perfectly at ease. The picture of casual wealth with his rolled shirt sleeves and that perpetual half-smile. But his younger sister Bianca knew better. "You're doing that thing where you pretend nothing bothers you," she said, appearing beside him. "'Cause nothing does," Dante replied smoothly. "It's just dinner. Liar." Bianca studied his face. "You know what Papa's going to announce, don't you?" Before he could answer, the butler called them inside. Dante drained his wine and followed, that smile never wavering. He had perfected it over 28 years, a mask that served him well in business negotiations and family obligations alike. Tonight, he suspected, he would need it more than ever. The dinner where everything changed. The dining room blazed with crystal chandeliers and generations of family portraits staring down from silk-covered walls. Giulia took her seat between her mother, Alina, and her older brother, Marco. Across the table, Dante caught her eye and raised his glass in a subtle greeting. She looked away quickly, annoyed by the flutter in her chest. They had known each other forever, moving in the same circles of Rome's elite. He was Marco's best friend, a constant presence at family gatherings, always with some teasing comment about her serious nature or her practical shoes. She found him insufferable, too charming, too confident, too aware of the effect he had on people. The fact that she sometimes dreamed about him only made her dislike him more. The meal progressed through multiple courses, conversation flowing easily about business, politics, upcoming social events. Giulia began to relax. Perhaps this was just dinner after all. Then her father, Roberto Romano, stood up. "When the world stops spinning, we have wonderful news to share," Roberto began, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "The Romano and Ferrara families have decided to unite our legacies in the most traditional way." Giulia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Oh, Giulia and Dante will be married. The engagement will be announced next week, and we're planning a summer wedding at the villa in Tuscany." The fork clattered against her plate. Giulia's vision narrowed, the edges of the room going dark. She heard her mother saying something about how lovely it would be, heard Marco's surprised laugh that died quickly, heard congratulations being offered. But it all sounded like it was coming from underwater. Her eyes found Dante's across the table. He wasn't looking at his father or hers. He was looking directly at her, and for once that eternal smile had faded. Something flickered in his dark eyes, something that looked almost like regret, or perhaps resignation, but not surprise. He wasn't surprised. "Did you know?" The question tore from her throat, cutting through the celebratory noise. The table went silent. Giulia, her mother started. Reaching for her hand, she pulled away, still staring at Dante. "Did you know?" He set down his wineglass carefully, deliberately. "My father told me last month." "Last month?" She tasted bitterness, sharp and metallic. "And you said nothing?" "What would I have said?" His voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "That I was against it? I'm not. That I wanted you to run? I didn't, you arrogant." Giulia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against marble. "You thought you'd just let me walk into this ambush? Just spring it on me like I'm some piece of property being transferred." "Giulia, sit down," her father commanded. "This isn't a discussion. This decision was made for good reasons. Reasons that benefit both families. Reasons that benefit you mean." She was shaking now, rage replacing shock. "What about what I want? What about my firm, my life, My choice. The truth behind closed doors, her mother followed her out to the terrace where Giulia had escaped, gulping cold night air like she'd been drowning. Elena's face was pained but not apologetic. Wanted to tell you sooner, my darling, but your father insisted. How long have you known? 2 years. Giulia felt the ground shift beneath her feet. 2 years? While I was building my business, making plans, living my life, you knew I was promised to someone. It's not as terrible as you think. Dante is a good man. He'll give you freedom to continue your work, and the marriage will strengthen both families' positions in ways you don't fully understand yet. I don't want to understand. Giulia spun to face her mother. I want to choose my own life. But even as she said it, fragments of memory were surfacing. That summer in Positano, when she was 17, and Dante's mother had introduced her to someone as future family. She had thought it was just pleasantry. The way her father always asked about Dante, always invited him to important events. The fact that, despite his apparent string of beautiful girlfriends, Dante had never brought anyone serious home. The pieces had been there all along. She just hadn't wanted to see them. The confrontation that revealed everything when Dante found her half an hour later. She was sitting on the stone wall overlooking the gardens, arms wrapped around herself against the chill. He draped his jacket over her shoulders without asking. It smelled like expensive cologne and wine-soaked oak barrels. I'm not sorry I didn't tell you, he said, standing beside her. You would have spent a month tearing yourself apart trying to find a way out. I saved you the trouble. How generous. I've known since I was 14, Giulia. His voice had lost all its usual lightness. Every girlfriend I ever had, my father reminded me it was temporary. Every plan I made for my future included you, whether I wanted it to or not. At least I gave you a few more weeks of peace. She looked at him then, really looked. In the moonlight, without that protective smile, he looked tired. Older than 28. Do you want this? Want? He laughed, but it was hollow. I stopped thinking about what I wanted years ago. I want to honor my family. I want to protect what we've built. And I want... He stopped, jaw tightening. What? You. I want you, Giulia. I have for years. So yes, I want this marriage, even if it's not the way I would have chosen to have you. The confession hung between them like smoke. Giulia's heart hammered against her ribs. She had spent so long convincing herself that her awareness of him was just annoyance. That the way her skin heated when he was near was irritation, nothing more. But hearing him say it out loud shattered those lies. I don't love you, she said, the words sharp as glass. I know. He smiled then, a shadow of his usual expression. But you don't hate me either. Maybe that's enough to start with. As he walked away, leaving her wrapped in his jacket on that cold terrace, Giulia realized the terrible truth. She didn't hate him. She never had. And that made everything so much worse. The next 3 months passed in a blur of wedding preparations that felt more like battle plans. Giulia threw herself into resistance, arguing with vendors, rejecting dress designs, making everything as difficult as possible. If she couldn't escape this marriage, she would at least refuse to make it easy. But her mother and Dante's mother, Teresa, moved through her protests like water around stone, smoothing everything over with practiced grace. The engagement party was held at a 5-star hotel. Giulia wore red instead of white, a small rebellion that nobody commented on. Dante kissed her cheek for the photographers, his lips warm against her skin, whispering, "You look beautiful when you're angry." She had stepped on his foot deliberately during their first dance. The wedding itself was held in June at the family's Tuscan villa. Surrounded by endless rows of grapevines turning green under the summer sun, the ceremony took place in the garden where ancient olive trees provided shade for 200 guests dressed in elegant silks and linen suits. Giulia wore a dress of ivory silk that her grandmother had worn, altered to fit her slender frame. She looked like a Renaissance painting, everyone said. She felt like a prisoner in the most beautiful cell imaginable. Dante waited for her at the altar in a perfectly tailored suit, his expression unreadable. When she reached him, he took her hand, and she felt the slight tremor in his fingers. It was the first sign he had given that he was anything less than perfectly confident. Somehow, That small vulnerability made everything harder. The penthouse that felt like a museum, their new home, was a sprawling penthouse in Rome's historic center. A wedding gift from both families. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of ancient domes and modern Rome spreading out in all directions. The interior was decorated in neutral tones, expensive but impersonal. Beautiful art hung on walls, designer furniture arranged in perfect symmetry. A chef's kitchen that neither of them would use much. It felt like a stage set, waiting for actors to bring it to life. "Your room is on the left." "Mine on the right," Dante said, setting down their bags on their first night home as husband and wife. "Shared spaces in between? I won't invade your privacy." Giulia had expected many things from this marriage, but not this careful, respectful distance. "What if someone asks why we have separate rooms?" "No one will see our private spaces. And if they do, we'll say we're modern in our thinking." He loosened his tie, looking exhausted from the wedding festivities. "I'm not going to force anything, Giulia. This marriage is complicated enough." She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt strangely insulted. The dance of near misses and stolen glances, they developed a routine quickly. Two people sharing space while trying not to collide. Dante left for his family's wine company headquarters early each morning. Giulia went to her architecture firm later, preferring to work into the evening when creativity flowed better. Some nights she came home to find him already asleep. Other nights he wasn't home at all, attending business dinners or meeting with distributors. But there were moments. Accidental intersections that felt anything but accidental. Mornings when she emerged from her room to find fresh coffee already made. A note beside it in his sharp handwriting. "Tried a new Ethiopian blend. Tell me what you think." Evenings when he came home early and found her working at the dining table. Blueprints spread everywhere, and he would sit quietly in the corner reading reports, his presence somehow making it easier to concentrate. Weekend afternoons, when they both retreated to the massive living room, her sketching on the couch while he went through contracts, existing in comfortable silence. The dangerous moments came in between, when she reached for a wine glass in the cabinet at the same time he did, their arms brushing, both freezing for a heartbeat too long before pulling away. When she wore a silk robe to the kitchen for water late at night, not expecting him to be there, and saw his eyes darken before he deliberately looked away. When they attended family dinners together, and he would place his hand on the small of her back, guiding her through rooms, the touch burning through fabric. The worst was when she caught him watching her. She would turn from her drafting table or look up from her phone, and he would be staring with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. He never looked away quickly or pretended he hadn't been staring. He would just hold her gaze until she broke first, heat flooding her cheeks. The night everything almost broke, the crisis came 3 months into their marriage at a gala for international wine distributors. The event was held at a historic palazzo, all gilt mirrors and frescoed ceilings, champagne flowing like water. Giulia wore a dress of deep emerald green that she had chosen specifically because it was elegant but armor-like, high-necked and long-sleeved. But the way Dante looked at her when she emerged from her room made her feel exposed anyway. "Going to be the most beautiful woman there," he said. Quietly, "I'm always the most beautiful." "Woman?" she replied, trying for bravado. "It's exhausting." His lips curved. "I believe it." The gala was fine until Giulia saw the woman. She was tall, blonde, sophisticated, draped in a backless dress that probably cost more than a car. And she was touching Dante's arm, leaning close to whisper something that made him laugh. Really laugh, the way he used to with such ease. The way he hadn't around Giulia in months. Something hot and vicious coiled in Giulia's stomach. She recognized it immediately and hated it. Jealousy. Pure, irrational. Consuming jealousy, she excused herself from the conversation she was having with a Portuguese distributor and walked directly to the bar. She ordered Prosecco, then another. The bubbles made her head light and her inhibitions lighter. When a handsome Spanish businessman asked her to dance, she said yes. His name was Diego, and he was charming in an obvious way that normally would have bored her. But she laughed at his jokes, let him hold her a little too close during the slow songs. And when Dante appeared beside them, jaw tight, She felt a savage satisfaction. "Excuse me?" Dante said to Diego, his voice carrying an edge she'd never heard before. "I need to speak with my wife," of course Diego said smoothly. But his eyes flickered with understanding and amusement. Dante took her elbow, guiding her through the crowd toward a quiet hallway lined with Renaissance paintings. His grip wasn't rough, but it was firm enough to make her pulse race. "What are you doing?" he demanded when they were alone. "Dancing, socializing. Isn't that what we're here for?" "You're flirting. So were you." She lifted her chin. "That blonde woman practically had her hands all over you." Something flashed in his eyes, triumph mixed with something darker. "Are you jealous, Giulia?" "Don't be ridiculous." "You are." He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "You're jealous, and it's driving you crazy because you don't want to feel anything for me." "I don't feel anything for you," she lied. "A liar." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "You feel the same thing I do? This tension that makes it hard to breathe when we're in the same room? This awareness that makes every accidental touch feel like fire. You want me, Giulia? You might hate that you want me, but you do." Her breath came faster. "You're arrogant." "I'm right." His hand came up, fingers barely grazing her cheek. "And you know it." She should have pulled away. Should have slapped him or said something cutting. Instead, she swayed forward, just slightly, like a plant bending toward sunlight. His eyes dropped to her lips. The moment stretched, pulled tight as a wire. Then voices echoed from the main hall, people approaching. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Dante ran a hand through his hair, breathing hard. "We should get back." "Yes." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. They returned to the party separately, maintaining careful distance for the rest of the evening. But something had changed. The wall between them had developed cracks, and they both knew it was only a matter of time before it shattered completely. The realization she couldn't escape that night. Alone in her bedroom, Giulia stared at the ceiling and faced the truth she had been running from since the engagement was announced. She didn't just want Dante physically, though God knows that was complicated enough. Somewhere between the forced coffee dates and the awkward family dinners, between his quiet respect for her work and the way he left her favorite pastries in the kitchen, she had started to care. She cared that he worked himself, was exhausted trying to modernize his family's traditional wine business. She cared that he called his mother every Sunday and was patient with his younger sister's dramatic college crises. She cared that despite having every right to be angry about this arranged marriage himself, he had never once made her feel guilty for her anger. The obligation she had resented was becoming something else entirely, and that terrified her more than the original arrangement ever had. The emergency call came on a Thursday morning while Giulia was reviewing plans for a new museum project. Dante's father, Lorenzo, had suffered a heart attack at the vineyard. He was stable, but he would need months of recovery. And someone had to take over complete control of Ferrara Wine Company immediately. That someone was Dante, and the company's biggest challenge was happening right now. Negotiations for a massive distribution deal with a Japanese corporation that could either save the company's expansion plans or sink them completely. The meetings were scheduled for the following week. Contracts needed review, presentations had to be perfected, strategy sessions were essential. "I need help," Dante said that evening, standing in her doorway looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. His tie was loosened, his hair messy from running his hands through it repeatedly. "I know about wine and vineyards. I don't know enough about the business side, the contracts, the negotiations. My father always handled that part." Giulia looked up from her laptop. "What about your uncle? Your cousins? They're good at following directions, not giving them. And I." He paused, pride and necessity warring on his face. "I trust you. Your mind, the way you think through problems. You've built your own business from nothing. You understand negotiation, strategy, risk assessment, please." She should have said no. She had her own work, her own clients. But looking at him standing there, asking for help instead of demanding it, something in her chest cracked open. "Okay," she heard herself say, "show me what you're working with." The long nights that brought them closer, what followed was a week of intensity unlike anything Giulia had experienced. They converted the dining room into a war room, spreading documents and contracts across every surface. Dante walked her through years of family business, explaining grape varieties and fermentation processes and market trends. She translated his passion into business language, restructuring presentations, identifying weaknesses and proposed contracts, role-playing difficult negotiation scenarios. They worked until 2, 3 in the morning. Fueled by coffee and the occasional glass of wine from bottles Dante pulled from their personal collection. Without the careful distance they usually maintained, something else emerged. They argued fiercely about strategy, challenged each other's assumptions, and somewhere in the midst of it, started finishing each other's sentences. The Japanese value long-term relationships over quick profits, Giulia said during one late-night session. Studying financial projections. So we emphasize our family's 5-generation history, Dante continued, already making notes. Show them we think in decades, not quarters. And we need to acknowledge that we're smaller than their other European suppliers. But frame it as flexibility, ability to customize, to respond quickly to their specific market needs. He looked up, eyes bright with excitement. Yes, that's perfect, she smiled, before she could stop herself. We make a good team, we do. His gaze lingered on her face. I keep forgetting to hate working with you. I never hated working with you. I hated being forced to marry you. The honesty felt strange and liberating. But working with you? This part isn't bad. The night before the big meeting, they finally finished all the preparations around midnight. Dante opened a bottle of wine from the year they were both born. Pouring 2 glasses, to partnership, he said. Raising his glass, to not completely failing, she countered. They drank. And the wine was sublime, complex, and perfectly balanced. Giulia felt the tension of the past week settle into her bones as exhaustion. She kicked off her shoes, tucking her feet under her on the couch. Dante loosened his collar, sitting beside her, closer than he usually would. Can I ask you something? She said after a long, comfortable silence. Always. That woman at the gala. The blonde. Who was she? A smile tugged at his lips. A distributor's daughter who has been pursuing me since we were teenagers. She means nothing. She was beautiful. So were a lot of people. He turned to face her more fully. Beauty isn't rare, Giulia. What you have, intelligence, strength, creativity, the way you argue with me, like you're trying to defeat an army, that's rare. That's what I find irresistible. Her breath caught. Dante ... I know we didn't choose this, he continued, setting down his wine glass. And I know you're still angry about that. But I need you to know something. If I had met you any other way, in any other circumstance, I would have pursued you anyway. Maybe not as well as I should have, because I'm apparently terrible at showing you how I feel when I'm not being forced into it. But I would have tried. The moment everything changed, the words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Giulia's heart hammered so hard she was sure he could hear it. For months, she had been fighting her attraction to him, telling herself it was just physical, just circumstance, just the result of forced proximity. But sitting here, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she couldn't lie to herself anymore. I used to dream about you, she admitted quietly. When I was younger, you would come over to see Marco and I would pretend I wasn't waiting for you to notice me. Then you would make some teasing comment about my serious face or my practical clothes. And I would convince myself I hated you. I noticed you. His voice was rough. I always noticed you. I just didn't know what to do with how much I wanted you when I knew we were eventually supposed to be together anyway. It felt like cheating somehow, developing feelings before we had to. So you kept your distance. It made you think I didn't care. I'm sorry for that. She reached out, her hand finding his where it rested on the couch between them. His fingers closed around hers immediately, warm and strong. The touch sent electricity up her arm. The negotiations tomorrow, she said. Not quite able to address the larger conversation yet. You're going to be brilliant. We're going to be brilliant. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that made her shiver. Thank you for helping me. For being my partner in this. That's what marriage is supposed to be, right? She tried for lightness but failed. Partnership? Is that what we have now? A real marriage? It was the question that had been hovering between them for days. Giulia looked at their joined hands, at his face in the soft lamplight, at the vulnerability in his expression that matched her own. She thought about the past week, working side by side, learning to trust each other's judgment, starting to build something real from the obligation they'd been given. "I think," she said slowly, "we're starting to—" He moved closer, or maybe she did. Somehow the distance between them vanished until their faces were inches apart. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel his breath against her lips. "Can I kiss you?" he whispered. "Not because we're supposed to, not for appearances. Just because I want to." Instead of answering, she closed the final distance between them. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like they were both afraid of breaking something fragile. Then Dante's hand came up to cup her face. Giulia's fingers tangled in his hair, and the kiss deepened into something that had been building for months. Years, maybe. All the tension, all the wanting, all the denied attraction poured into that kiss until they were both breathless. When they finally pulled apart, Giulia was trembling. Dante rested his forehead against hers, his thumb stroking her cheek. "I'm still angry about the arrangement," she said, because she needed him to know. "I'm still angry that nobody asked what I wanted, I know, but I'm not angry at you anymore. I don't think I ever really was. I was angry at the situation, at feeling trapped. You were just convenient to blame. I can handle that," he smiled. The real smile she was learning to recognize, not the mask he showed the world. "As long as I get to kiss you again, that might be negotiable." But she was already leaning back in. This kiss was different, deeper, full of promise. When his hand slid to her waist, pulling her closer, she didn't resist. When she tugged him down to her, pressing the length of her body against his, he groaned into her mouth. They fell back against the couch cushions, a tangle of limbs and breathless laughter and kisses that said everything they'd been holding back. "Your room or mine?" Dante murmured against her neck, his lips tracing fire along her skin. "Does it matter?" "Not even a little." He stood, pulling her up with him, and she took his hand willingly this time. They walked together to his room, no more pretense of distance, no more walls between them. 3 months later, the museum project that Giulia designed was featured in Architectural Digest. The Japanese deal that she and Dante negotiated together became the foundation for Ferrara. Wine company's international expansion. Lorenzo recovered slowly but surely, proud of how his son and daughter-in-law had handled the crisis. But more importantly, penthouse that had felt like a museum began to feel like a home. Giulia's sketches appeared on the refrigerator. Dante's books migrated to her nightstand. They fought sometimes passionate arguments about everything from politics to where to place furniture. But they always made up in ways that left them both satisfied and smiling. On a Sunday morning, 6 months after their wedding, Giulia woke in Dante's arms, sunlight streaming through windows they'd forgotten to close the night before. He was already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. "What?" she asked sleepily. "Just thinking about how I got impossibly lucky. We were forced into this marriage. There was no luck involved. Maybe not at first." He kissed her forehead. "But somewhere along the way, obligation turned into choice. I would choose you every time, Giulia. No arrangement necessary." She propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face. "You know what the worst part of this whole thing is?" "What?" "My mother was right. She said you were a good man who would give me freedom to build my life." I hated that she was right, he laughed, pulling her back down against his chest. "Don't tell her that. She'll be insufferable about it. It's too late. I'm having lunch with her tomorrow." They lay there in comfortable silence. Two people who had been forced together by family obligation, but had chosen to build something real from those forced foundations. It wasn't the love story either of them would have written if given the choice. But maybe, Giulia thought, as Dante's hand traced lazy patterns on her back that made it even more precious. They had taken something imposed on them and transformed it into something authentic. The marriage contract had bound them together, but love, the real kind that grew slowly through partnership and respect and learning to see each other truly, That was what would keep them that way. "I love you," she said, the words still new enough to feel vulnerable. "Love you too," he replied immediately. "Even when you're angry, especially when you're angry." She bit his shoulder lightly in response, making him laugh. Then she kissed the same spot, gentle this time, and let herself sink into the morning, into this life they were building together, into the unexpected gift of finding love in the place she least expected it. Outside, Rome woke slowly under golden sunshine. Inside their home, two people who had once been strangers bound by duty discovered that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that don't begin with choice, but end with it anyway.